Hello, I'm Jeff Boyer of Jeff UNCORKED, and today I'm introducing you to a unique and rare tasting opportunity. We're going to be tasting side by side a Penfolds Grange by John Duval and compare it to his first vintage at Long Shadows Vineyards of the 2003 sequel. The Penfolds Grange is a 1998, 22 years old, and we'll see how that compares with the sequel, which is 19 years old. With me today, I've got Dane Narbaitz. He's the president and partner of Long Shadows Vintners. I've also got Brian Billdt, who is the founder and CEO of Primafit Indonesia. And we also have Gilles Nicault, the director of winemaking for Long Shadows. It's going to be a terrific opportunity to compare these two wines side by side. To get a little bit of perspective of Long Shadows Vintners, Dane, I'd like you to share a little bit of the history, what the whole project was all about, and maybe how John Duval and Penfolds Grange got involved.
Sure, be happy to. So Long Shadows Vintners is a unique project that was started by my stepfather, Alan Shoup, who used to run Chateau Saint Michel Winery, our largest in Washington. So he ran Saint Michel for 20 years, and then in 2001, he left to expand on a concept that he had started at Chateau Saint Michel, which was bringing winemakers from outside of the state, international winemakers, to come to Washington and use their expertise to really showcase the fruit and the wines that we have here in Washington. So John Duval, having made Grange in Australia and being one of the top Shiraz or Syrah producers in the world, was somebody that Alan sought out and recruited to come to Washington to make Syrah. And John happened to be leaving Grange, Penfolds, around the same time that Alan was starting this project, and he reached out to John, and coincidentally, John was at a wine festival, I think it was Aspen.
Yeah.
Aspen in Colorado, and had recently tasted some Washington wines that he was very impressed with. So he was eager to learn more, and we brought John to Washington, and he agreed to partner on this project.
And so he was known for his Australian Shiraz, and Penfolds Grange was a very high level of the Penfolds line. And that was at about the same time that Gilles started the Long Shadows project. And so you worked with John Duval on that first vintage of what became sequel.
That's absolutely right, yeah. Thank you, Jeff. And so we started 2003. So Alan Shoup did put together Long Shadows Vintners. So 2003 being the first vintage, we looked at sourcing for the grapes all across the Columbia Valley. That's one of the assets of Washington state wine industry, is to have different AVAs with distinctive characteristics somehow. And so what we decided to do was to go to the Yakima Valley. There's an amazing vineyard there managed by Dick Boucher. It's called Boucher Vineyard. And then also we went to the Red Mountain and got some Syrah over there. Red Mountain is an AVA that is much warmer. So on one hand, Yakima Valley is going to bring that acidity, the brightness in the wine, and then the Red Mountain is going to bring some backbone to it.
So the same grape variety grown in different AVAs with different characteristics.
That's exactly right.
And then your talent working with John is manipulating that in the winery. Can you tell us just a very little bit about the winemaking for 2003?
Yeah, so basically, as John Duval was coming into Walla Walla to work closely with me, we tried to establish a style. We didn't want to duplicate all his winemaking from the Barossa Valley to Walla Walla. We needed to see what the terroir was going to give us, what the grapes could give us. And what we really wanted to do was expressing that brightness, the intensity of the Syrah in Washington State. I think John Duval was really impressed actually by how much character the Syrah was providing to it. So when I say we then sourced some grapes from Yakima Valley and then Red Mountain, I was talking with John and I said, you know, John, I was able to get a little bit older grapes from Washington State. So I was pretty excited and say, oh, that's awesome. How old? I said, well, they were planted in 1993. And we're talking about 2003, so that was like 10-year-old, but 1993 was some of the first Syrah planted in Washington State, when actually John is used to like working with vineyards that are around
40 years old, 100 years
100
old, exactly.
And so that's going to be one of the main difference with Grange against sequel. It's going to be the edge of the vines. So then one other difference that we've done with the sequel is actually we're using French oak, because he was really impressed by how much, again, blue fruit and dark fruit were coming out of the fruit, like expressing the Syrah, the characteristics, the true characteristic of the variety. And so French barrels just like enhance the characteristics. So he said, yeah, let's go with French oak. And I was not quite prepared for it, because I had started buying some barrels or whatnot. I was started buying American oak, because actually Grange is all American oak. So I thought, okay, it's going to be John Duval from Australia. I better be prepared. It's going to be American oak. But now we changed. So that's where we don't want to duplicate. We really looked at what we could do the best for the wine.
Awesome. Well, I'm really looking forward to tasting these wines side by side for so many reasons. But I want to also introduce Brian Billdt, who, without Brian, as a friend of mine and a fellow wine lover, this 1998 bottle of Penfolds Grange would not be here. So Brian, why don't you share a little bit of your background with Penfolds and your winemaking or wine
Well,
tasting?
first of all, I'm the outsider here. I'm not in the wine business. I'm a wine lover. I'm a wine geek. I'm a wine nerd. I have had nothing to do in the business of wine. I'm born and raised in Edmonds, Washington, and I first discovered wine in the year 1999, the book Wine for Dummies. And then also I was taught by the aristas at the Arista Wine Cellar where Jeff worked, and that's how we
Back
met.
in the day, yeah.
But I've spent my adult life in Indonesia, and Indonesia is very close to Australia. So when I started to become interested in wine, I studied Wine for Dummies and learned a little bit about wine here. But when I would go back to Indonesia, people would say, Washington, wine? They make wine in Washington, D.C.? And I would have to explain that there was another Washington that had a great viticultural area that was growing grapes and making wine. And then, of course, the comparisons would always be with Australia, because Australia is such a close neighbor to Indonesia, and the Australian Shiraz, as they call it there, not Syrah, but Shiraz, was thought to be the best and unbeatable, and really you could only drink Australian Shiraz.
And you met John Duval.
Yes, yes. So when I found out that John Duval was going to make a wine in Washington State, oh my God, I was so ecstatic, because he's so famous and iconic because of Penfolds in Indonesia, has a huge market share, and they're so revered there. And so when I found out about the John making the wine for you, I became instantly enamored with the whole concept of bringing these winemakers in. And so you brought in the most famous South Hemisphere winemaker to Washington State.
For sure.
And I just knew that I had to explore further, and this tasting will be exciting.
Well, and Brian and I have shared really good wines together. I know you have gifted me another Penfolds when we first started sharing wines together. And one of the things I'm looking forward to is, with all of our passion for quality wines, being able to taste these vintages side by side. Yeah. As I mentioned at the top, this is a really rare opportunity to be able to do that. And so I think, without further ado, because I'm kind of getting thirsty, I think we should taste.
Great.
Agreed?
To me, yes.
All right. Gilles, would you do the honor? And I think what I'd like to do, and I'll just explain to people, go ahead and pour the Grange first. This isn't a formal tasting. We're not advanced sommeliers. I'm just very interested in being able to share these wines and get candid feedback. They've all been stored in temperature-controlled cellar. Last night I stood them up because as an old wine, chances are they've got some sediment to them. We talked earlier about not decanting them. So I just pulled the corks and opened these up about 2 hours ago. So we'll see how they do. So I'm keeping the Grange on my left, Sequel on my right.
Thank you.
And just, I will admit one of my concerns was that the Grange might be over the hill, but I can tell just from the aromas on it that it's not.
Yeah, I think one of the difference here, or the characteristic for Grange, is it always carries an amazing acidity. Like when I work with John, we were always looking at the pH of the acidity of the wine, and the pH was like around 3.8, 3.77 or so, and but is used in the Barossa Valley to like 3.5 or so, and actually with lower pH, with more acidity, the wine has...
In Washington?
No, in the Barossa Valley,
Okay.
Better acidity in actually the Barossa Valley. Washington State, we have really warm days just like in the Barossa Valley. We have cool nights as well, but really helps to retain that brightness, the acidity in Washington State. But somehow, because of the soil, the Barossa Valley keeps that acidity to like 3.5 when we cannot do that in Washington State.
Yeah. I'm actually surprised at the freshness on both of them. They have a little bit of mature characters, but a lot of freshness, a lot of fruit in each of them.
I would expect 1998 to see, a little bit of amber tinge to the rim on the Grange, and there's still tons of fruit in it.
So bright.
Yeah.
A lot of
Yeah.
a lot of that black currant, cassis flavor. They are just beautiful.
Very youthful. I thought they'd be a little more tired.
You and I have shared this. For our viewers, this tasting was supposed to take place about 3 years ago. COVID got in the way, and Brian and I have shared numbers of times. It's like, geez, is that Grange still going to hold up or not? And I believe it certainly has.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I would drink this.
So one of the similarities between the Barossa Valley and Washington State, which is kind of interesting to talk about as well, is that we are straight-rooted. Like from the late 1900s or so in France, California, everywhere, they got phylloxera, which is a little insect that eats the roots, and the vineyards were decimated. And the solution for it was to plant French varietals like Syrah into rootstock, American rootstock actually. And so throughout the world, that's what it is. It's always grafted vines. In Washington State and the Barossa Valley, we have not had the phylloxera so far, or very little bit. And so it's straight-rooted. So it's like the root system itself is Syrah root system.
So most Syrah in Washington State is own-rooted?
Unrooted, yeah.
So
yeah.
that's
so
interesting.
some people have grafted some, but like probably 90+% is straight-rooted.
Anything else to share with?
Yeah, actually, you were talking. I'm sorry, you were talking earlier about Shiraz.
Yeah.
Actually, I remember at the beginning when we were talking with John Duval, we were talking about naming the sequel, and it's like, okay, sequel, somehow. So sequel basically is the sequel of Alan Shoup, going from Chateau Saint-Michel into Long Shadows Vintners, and the sequel for John Duval going from Penfold into Long Shadows as well.
State.
Yeah.
Then I guess I just started talking again, right?
It's a sequel to each of their corporate careers
Yeah,
that
yeah,
they moved
right.
out of these
Yeah.
large wineries
Yeah.
and started smaller projects.
And I think it's important to share with our viewers the lack of difference between Syrah and Shiraz
And so I'm
around the
gonna-
world.
yeah.
It's a terminology.
And so, John, when we were talking about the label and how to make the wine, at the same time we said, should it be a Syrah or Shiraz? And so John Dewar looked at us and said, it's not from Australia, it's no Shiraz, it's always going to be a Syrah. So our sequel is Syrah, and we're testing it against Shiraz, but technically it's the same varietal.
Yep. People get that confused. And in Washington State, as you all may know, my passion is drinking and supporting and promoting small production Washington wines. And so I find when I'm doing consumer tastings, I always explain that to people. It's like Shiraz, Syrah, Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigio. You know, it's like they're the same grapes, it's just a little education stuff. So I'd like to share with you, and let's go around the table, my opinion of both of these wines. First of all, I'm really impressed by the fact that even though they are 20-some years old, the fruit is still there. I am a self-professed Syrah lover. That is the wine that I enjoy the most. I'm not an expert, but I find the Grange has all of that plum and blueberry fruit to it, nice acidity. I find it, compared to the sequel, maybe a little more complex, a little different things going on. The acidity and the finish definitely shows. The tannins are there, but they're soft, as is classic for, you know, a wine that has some age to it. The sequel, I'm so glad I have a lot of this in my cellar because it's a little rounder, a little more, to me, a blackberry component to it. Really full-bodied. Tannins are a little stronger, which, again, they're soft and incorporated, but I think this would pair fantastic with a nice grilled lamb chop. A little bit more of a lingering finish to it. Brian, what do you think? Comparing.
They're two amazingly hedonistic, pleasure-giving wines. I think they're great, and I could drink them both every day for a while before I would get bored. But I just want to give credit to Washington State to be able to make world-class wines that are from young vines compared to Australia, which of course they deserve credit. They've made great wines, but these vines are 70, 80, sometimes 90 years old. And for Washington State to do in 10 or 20 years what all the wine snobs say take 100 years, I think it's really, really amazing.
That's a really, really excellent point. Young vines versus old vines. One of the things I like to share with people when I'm promoting Washington wines is like the reason that Washington wines are getting better is because the vines are older and the grapes are better. And as I've had many people, many winemakers tell me, it's like you can't make good wine out of lousy grapes.
That's very true.
But you can make lousy wine out of good grapes. You can screw it up in the winery, but there's nothing that you can do starting with bad fruit to make a good wine. So,
and I'll say that one thing, in Indonesia we were very much influenced by the French as well, and there's a very strong Bordeaux and Burgundy community, and I think and again, pardon me because I'm talking about your native country.
Please do.
I think the French tend to impress on us that pedigree and the reputation and the age of the chateau is really important, and perhaps it is, but at the end of the day, how the wines taste is what's most important. And you can read the 100-point wine scores and all these different books and magazines that rate the wines, but it's what you like that is the most important thing. And I'm liking both these wines equally for different reasons. I like the Grange because it's got that American oak that I don't get. So precisely the fact that it's different is what I like about it. The finish, oh my gosh, extremely long. I lost track at about 40 seconds on the finish. The Long Shadows, the fruit jumps out of the glass. It's a sniffer's delight. Great nose. It's a wonderful wine, and I think you're right that Washington might be making Syrah as good as anyone in the United States, at least.
We have a huge potential for it, at least, for sure.
Yeah.
Dane, your impressions? Do you have a favorite?
I don't necessarily have a favorite. And first off, I just want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to enjoy a bottle of Grange. This
My
isn't
pleasure.
something that we get to do very often. A bottle like this, I think, retails somewhere around $700-800 a bottle. So, and I've only had the pleasure of tasting it one other time. So, thank you for treating us. And it's
Thank you, Brian.
Thank
too.
you, Brian. Also, a real treat for me to be able to taste it side by side with our wine. And I'm impressed with both wines. I'm impressed for a lot of different reasons, primarily because of, I guess, the longevity as far as how well these have held up, how much life they still have,
Yes.
the acidity, the balance in both of these. Lots of acidity still left in each of them. I'd say the sequel is maybe richer, rounder. I agree with your comments. Has a little bit more of kind of, to me, more of the dark fruits, whereas the Grange has more of the red fruits, I'd say, as far as the fruit comparison. Both of them have classic Syrah varietal characteristics, that great spice, some earthiness, some smoke,
Black
all of
pepper
that. Black
and
pepper,
gaminess. Yep.
gamey. Yeah, so I'm just impressed with how well that each of them are showing, and it's a treat to be able to taste them.
Dane, I don't have it off the top of my head, but we know the Penfolds is northward of $600 or $700.
Correct.
What is the current vintage of the sequel going
We sell
for?
sequel for $65.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So good company.
Well
And I-
Thumbs
done.
up there.
Yeah,
Well
yeah.
done.
And it's, the purpose of these tastings, a lot of time we'll do comparative tastings. It's never to say which one's better than the other. For us, it's all about just being in good company. And when there's a price gap that's big, it's significant. But to be able to show that we deserve at least to go shoulder to shoulder on a table like this with a group like this
Absolutely.
is very rewarding.
Yes, amen.
Absolutely. Gilles, to finish up your side-by-side comments.
And absolutely rewarding as a winemaker when I can be, face to face with a wine that we didn't really talk about it, but they started making Grange in Australia, Barossa Valley, in the early 50s. Since early 50s, they've been making that very wine. And then 2003 sequel was the first vintage of sequel that we ever produced. Like, I had not met John Duval before, and so John Duval came and we looked at different vineyards around the Columbia Valley, and we decided to make this blend there. So it was kind of the beginning, and from there it's just going to get better and better. But after 19 years, seeing the quality of it and that it still can stand alongside a Grange, it's like really rewarding.
Got to
sure.
be rewarding for
Yes.
sure.
And,
for sure.
and I totally agree with all your comments, where I have that brightness of acidity and a lot of blue notes on the Grange there, just like so vibrant and lively in the mouthfeel. On the sequel, a little bit more on the fat side, still has good acidity, it's still vibrant in the mouth, but definitely that viscosity in the back, that just richness. And
Yeah.
it's just incredible as well. I didn't think it was going to age that much. I'm so surprised. It's like, I've tasted over the years, so I've knew about it for today, but 19 years ago, I didn't expect this to last for 19 years. So what we kind of done, winemaking style as well, we have about 4 or 5% of Cabernet Sauvignon. We've done that in Grange for a long time, putting a little bit of Cabernet Sauvignon to bring some backbone to it, a little bit of that layer of
Right.
foundation for a little bit better tannins. And then we've been doing this as well. And so that has about 4 or 5% Cabernet Sauvignon.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So there's a little cab in the sequel.
And I think that we can really note that little layer right there.
Absolutely. And this afternoon, which I really appreciate all four of you, three of you joining me, I'm just so appreciative, and thank you for this opportunity. Dane, Gilles, Brian,
Thank you.
for joining me.
Putting it all
and
together.
I will close our little tasting, and we still have some wine to maybe share with our video crew.
Sounds
But
perfect.
the best wine is the wine you like.
Amen.
Cheers.
Cheers.